Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park. And today we bring you our first read of Where I Belong, Healing Trauma and Embracing Asian American Identities by Sujin Lee and Linda Yoon. This is a book filled with a lot of education, a lot of self-discovery and experiences. But I think one thing that the authors do really well is include ways for you to absorb this information.
Right, a way to regulate your system in between reads.
Yeah, because I guess the goal is to deal with all of our traumas within this 20-minute episode of podcast over 4 sessions. I mean, there's no real way that we're going to be able to handle all of it, but I think it's a good opening topic and a way for us to see the things that we may not have seen clearly or give words to the things that we may not have been able to describe.
Yeah, exactly.
In that sense, with them providing us resources, I only felt that it was right that we also share these resources with everyone else. So that's kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted to go over 2 exercises that they had provided in the book, and one is going to be more of a meditative breathing exercise, and the other one is going to be a grounding exercise. So for the first one, let's go into breathing, and this is just to prepare us for the read, prepare us for the discussion a little bit, and I'm going to be reading directly from the book. So, this is called box breathing, and what you're going to do is imagine the 4 sides of a square. You can imagine one in your head or use your finger to draw an imaginary box in front of you. Each side of the square represents 4 seconds. Start by breathing in deeply for 4 seconds as you draw one side of the square. As you turn to draw the next side of the square, hold your breath for 4 seconds. As you draw the third side of the square, breathe out for 4 seconds. As you connect the last side of the square, hold your breath for 4 seconds. Then continue this pace of breathing until you feel your heart rate has decreased to a relaxed state or until you can feel more comfortable. So you can do that as you need, but we're going to move on to our grounding exercise. And this one's much more to put you into the space for you to be able to kind of feel your own emotions and take in the information that we're going to take in.
And it's also to create a feeling of safety and comfort for yourself.
Right. So ideally, you're in a room that you feel safe in. Get seated, lay down, find yourself a position that feels comfortable. With this exercise, we're going to start by taking in slow, long, deep breaths. And what I want you to do is find a nice, easy pace of breathing. So we're going to do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what that means is that we're going to do an exercise where we go through 5 different senses. The first one is going to be see. So what I want you to do is open your eyes and begin noticing what you see in your surroundings. Name, either in your mind or aloud, 5 tangible things that you see. For example, in your room, you may see a closed window, a green pillow, a thin pen, anything that you might be able to spot. When you are naming the 5 items, try to include one description that specifies the item that you see, as given in the example. Next, 4. Touch. One by one, find 4 items that you can touch. It could be a soft blanket, the smooth tabletop, the buttons on a phone, or even your computer keyboard if you are at work. If there are not many things around you, you can touch your hair, nails, or even the clothes you're wearing. Touch one item or surface at a time, and just notice the item's texture and see how it feels on your skin. 3. Hear. Slow down and find 3 sounds that you can pick out in your surroundings. It could be the sound of someone talking in the room next door, a car engine outside, a dog barking in the distance, or even the sound of your own breathing. Focus on just one sound at a time, naming and noticing where that sound comes from. 2. Smell. Identify 2 scents that you can smell in your surroundings. Perhaps it's the smell of a candle, or the lingering scent of food, or the fragrance of freshly brewed tea. You can open a tube of lotion or essential oil fragrance and notice its smell. Focus on one scent at a time, finding 2 separate smells. 1. Taste. Notice one taste that you can identify in your mouth. It may be the taste of your tea or coffee, or the taste of food that's lingering on your tongue. It could even be the taste and temperature of the water you're drinking. Whatever it might be, try to focus on that one taste and name it. After you've identified each of these 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 sensory experiences, come back to your deep, slow breaths. Notice how your thoughts have slowed down and your body has relaxed, even if it's just a little. Perfect. So those are our box breathing and grounding exercises. Use them as you need. This is not just a one-time experience. If you need to find a reference point, it is going to be in our book, which we'll go into more in-depth discussion with. But before that, let's find some happiness and joy in what's going to be our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is Kyle Hanagami. Kyle Hanagami is a talented choreographer and creative director based in Los Angeles, California. Their style can be described as contemporary with hip hop and a little bit of jazz. Their movement is seen as intricate, fluid, and on top of the beat. You can learn more about Kyle Hanagami through their YouTube at Kyle Hanagami. That's KYLEHANAGAMI.
Yep, and that's going to be our recommendation for the week. All right. Well, I hope we're ready. We did our exercises. We're reading Where I Belong by Sujin Lee and Linda Yoon. Our first read was Roman numeral 9 through page 70, which was the intro plus chapter 1, unpacking our Asian American experiences, through chapter 2, the context of our Asian American experiences.
When we start out very hard. We talk about trauma at the very, very beginning.
Yeah, it gives us an understanding like, buckle in, get ready. This is the book that's going to be describing a lot of things that may be dormant inside of your heart.
And when the authors talk about trauma, they acknowledge that traumas come from abuse, traumas come from difficult situations, and can sometimes be psychologically diagnosed, like PTSD or post traumatic stress disorder. However, what kind of interested me or made me want to lean into the reading was the idea of invisible trauma, the traumas that are less understood and don't have psychological diagnoses.
Yep. And that can vary from cultural conditions, environment, the way that you're brought up. This is the stuff that I think it's harder for us to put a finger on because we are living with these things but don't notice how this affects us quite as much.
Exactly. For those who are in the Filipino experience or the Filipinx experience, think of these as the toxic tita traits when they ask you if you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a significant other and that causes you to bottle up. Or when they tell you, oh, you look such and such, and they comment on your weight or your looks or the way that you present yourself.
Yeah, like they'll say you look healthy. They'll say, "Oh, that's a nice shirt. It looks like it's a little small, or it looks like it fits you a little tight." Things like that
Yeah.
are just kind of within our experiences. We also need to then talk about kind of the bigger picture of what invisible trauma might look like for Asian Americans as a whole. And the authors do a great job of including some work by Professor Claire J. Kim. And that's going to be based around our racial positioning and what she talks about as racial triangulation, which is the different racial positions in relation to other races. Now, the part of the Asian American experience is that it may not be visibly seen. It's considered an in between ground for Black and white communities. What the authors write in this book is that most racism against Asians tend to manifest in the form of microaggressions and other subtleties that were easy to dismiss. Racism was commonly viewed as an issue between Black and white communities, while discriminations and racism against Asian Americans was often ignored and unacknowledged. So when we talk about growing up and feeling different, but not really being bullied in the same way or not feeling like, like people weren't crossing the street when you saw them on the other side, like things like that, which is a strong Black experience in America in a lot of places. There are other things that affect us that may not be so easily visible.
Right. And those microaggressions to me feel like major aggressions. Like, for example, thinking about when kids at school would say, ew, what are you eating? Or they would make fun of your language or the way that you sound when you speak, or make fun of the way you look, like those who would stretch their eyelids to make them look squinty
or slanted.
or slanted. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that Professor Kim talks about. And she talks about racial triangulation perpetuating through two characterizations. One being relative valorization, which we'll talk about, but also civic ostracism, which is kind of what you're talking about, which is when you portray Asians as perpetual foreigners and there's going to be a constant barrier to full integration and inclusion. So always feeling like a separate person. The other side of that is the relative valorization, which is assigning positive cultural and racial traits to Asian groups,
Mm.
seeing them as superior to Black people or superior to other races. And this is the, oh, you're so smart. Like, you're going to be a doctor. You're this. Like, it's that constant assigning of you need to be this kind of person because this is what your race declares you as.
Right. And Asian is such a big community that you can't just be placed into a monolithic culture, but it still happens.
Yeah, I think the authors do a great job in the beginning of this book, even distinguishing the Asian American experience with the Southeast Asian and the South Asian and the Philippines, and making sure that there's an understanding that not all of these experiences are going to span all races of Asian.
Right.
It's meant to create a sense of connection between shared traumas that might have happened within childhood or teenage or even adulthood.
Totally. And they also bring in the fact that West Asian countries are not usually even included in the conversation, and how Asian and Asian American folks are lumped together with Pacific Islanders, which is a totally different story as well.
Yeah. However, one of the things that is shared, and the reason why we have built the term AAPI, is because there is a connected trauma amongst our cultures.
Hmm. And our connected trauma is not only about the painful experiences themselves, but how we respond to them. For example, when we don't process them, it causes these raw, unresolved emotions to come out, like lashing out when somebody does something irritating, or closing up when something doesn't feel good to you anymore or comfortable anymore.
hmm A lot of the stuff which we have a tough time processing in real life, it's stuff and reasons why we go to a therapist to try to figure out what those trigger points are and how to acknowledge them.
Mhm.
So it's definitely trauma that seems to lie more covered because we keep stacking things to hide them.
Right. And this also relates to intergenerational trauma, the traumas that our ancestors, as close to us as our parents and grandparents, continue to hold on to and hide because of the history of physical displacement and identity crisis.
Yep. And within the intergenerational nature, that kind of leads us to this big topic that they had, which is the model minority myth.
Mm-hmm.
The model minority myth is something that I think has always affected me. It's something that affects a lot of us, but
Yes.
just personally, it's something where I really like this was the thing that I couldn't put words to. This was the thing that once I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, like this was a big part of my life of figuring out why I couldn't fit in.
Mm-hmm. And our families have done it for a long time in order to assimilate with the dominant culture, which is white culture.
Yep. It's the thought that we need to be the perfect citizens. We need to be the model minorities in America so that we can fit in, we can blend in, and we can be a part of what America is going to create.
Exactly. And it instills values, like you said, fitting in or conformity, as well as obedience to not question anyone and to continue to quote unquote follow orders.
Yep. What this might mean, though, is giving up a huge part of yourself, a huge part of your identity. The experiences that I've heard and seen from my friends are no longer being able to speak the language that their parents speak because they needed to fit in, losing their names and going with something like John or Mary or something that's very American and honestly a lot of times biblical because of the Christian nature around the founding of America.
Yes.
It's a large part of who we are and who we tend to lose because our parents wanted us to slide in and become successful in this country.
Exactly. And that reminds me of my personal experience with the model minority idea. For example, like what Steven said, losing one's mother language in order to speak the dominant language, which is English. my parents were indecisive in terms of whether to teach me their languages or not. And the deciding factor was my nanay or my grandmother who said, I want to learn English and we want to make sure that they don't have the accent. So let's not muddy it by speaking our languages, which now makes me feel a little bit of regret that I don't have those languages as embedded in me as I would hope. Except in emergencies, for some reason, I revert back to Tagalog.
This was your nanay that told you not to speak Tagalog?
Nanay was the one who chose to make us not speak.
But now she gets mad at your brother and sister for not speaking Tagalog.
She does, so I think she's forgotten about her decision.
I think she probably regrets it a little bit. I think
Maybe.
the whole idea of trying to fit in is never a good idea. Like in
Mm-hmm.
high school, when you try to fit in with the cool kids, it always led to bad decisions.
Right.
It seems what our parents were trying to do is slide into the DMs of America.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to get noticed and be fit in directly without having to cause a big stir.
Right, exactly.
It's a big problem in the way that racism and prejudice and systemic barriers continue to oppress us
Mm-hmm.
because if we aren't standing up against it and we're trying to fit in, then it counters what other people are trying to do, which might be to lift up our cultures and have our voices be louder as individuals and people of different cultures.
Totally. And healing these traumas will help us to take up space, to expand our footprint in society.
Yeah, there's a lot in this book.
Mm-hmm.
There's even more than that to kind of go over. A great thing that the authors do within this book is include the individual stories of, I think, who they might have had as patients or individuals willing to offer up their own telling.
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel about these parts of the read?
When we were given stories from individuals, it humanized the experience of the book as well as humanizing and grounding the experience of what we're learning in context and in concept. So rather than it being just all scientific, it became more personal.
Yeah, and one of the people, Amanda, which her story is shared in this book, talked about growing up in San Gabriel Valley, which is an Asian hub of Los Angeles. And she talked about the difference in her Asian experience versus someone else, because there are a lot of Asian people around her, but she didn't feel American enough. She didn't feel Asian enough.
Mm.
And that was something I shared so deeply with. It was a connecting point when she said that she was trying to be extra Asian, like read manga, watch anime, do all these things that would draw her character to becoming this stereotype of what an Asian person was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I think I struggled with when I was growing up. When I was trying to listen to more K-pop because my brother was doing it, I always saw my brother as someone who more fit into the Korean lifestyle. So he was kind of being praised for being American, but also very Korean by the things that he liked. Whereas me, I was like, I love burgers. I love, I don't know, I guess American music. I love all these things that are available in America, but may not be seen as Korean.
Right.
Did reading these two chapters change the way you see yourself in context and as an individual person?
I think reading these two chapters reminded me about the context, that there's not just one experience, but there are multiple experiences layered on top of each other. For example, like you were saying, you didn't feel like you were Korean enough. I felt like I had to prove my Asianness, period. Like it wasn't about being Filipino, it wasn't about being Ilocano or Pangasinense. Correct me in the comments, but it was just being Asian because a lot of people say that Filipinos are not Asian. So there's this entirely different aspect of being Asian that is acceptable versus being Asian that's outside of that realm.
Yeah. I think overall, there's a lot that each individual person might get from this book. I don't think this book is meant to guide you in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant for you to figure out yourself. Like, I'm sure a lot of people, if not all, at least most people, have had identity struggles at some point in their life.
Totally.
The issues that have been brought up with being Asian American in an American world
Mm-hmm.
are going to be individualized and personalized for each person.
For sure.
But what I did want to leave off on is one of the poems and the lead up to the poem that was written by one of the contributors to the story, and this is Sumana. It reads, I understand why immigrants hold on to their cultural richness and generational stories as heirlooms. They keep us going, and they remind me of where I came from and to never forget. The land of rivers and mountains, the sounds of bells and cows, the smell of incense, spice, and Vikram tempos, the feeling of pouring rain and warm sun, the embrace of my mother's arm, the strength of my father's hands, and the taste of home, my home.
Hmm.
I don't think these reads are going to get any lighter.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel heavy reading this though.
Right. I feel like the way that they presented the material was with softness in mind.
And I hope that's what keeps happening as we go into our second read.
Totally.
And that's going to be
Pages 71 through 150 in the physical copy, and for everyone, chapters 3, Our Body's Responses to Racial Identities, through chapter 6, Journey to Trauma Healing.
Yep. And I would say listening to parts of this on audiobook, some of the exercises that they have, you can do. Other exercises I find better with the audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
So use whatever resource you need to read that feels comfortable for you. For anyone that feels like there's thoughts or experiences that they feel the need to release, we are here to listen. And you can do so by contacting us at
AsianBookClubPod@gmail.com for email, and at AsianBookClubPod on Instagram. But as a quick aside, if you do share with us, know that we're not mental health professionals, but we are here as a listening ear.
Yeah, we're not going to give advice. We're just here to be a place where you can rest your troubles or your happinesses on, even.
Yeah, definitely.
We also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com, where we have books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast.
Otherwise, make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat! Bye!